Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to get the party started officially and actually look at how we can go about adding users and, well, managing their experience with our application. So we'll be adding users, selecting the role that they're in, and generating a default password. And then we'll have to modify our login process such that when persons log in using that default password, we redirect them to a screen that allows them to change this password. Now, before I move on, I'm going to show you a little adjustment I made to my main window where I added a little bar at the bottom here and I have the text that says logged in as : and the username. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And it's really simple, but these simple things, make your application come to life. So what I did in my design for my main window was to add what they call a context strip. So I went to status strip rather. So I went to the toolbox and then I got inside of menus and the toolbars one that says status strip. So I just dragged that over, dropped it down the bottom part here, and then I added a status label. So I'm going to click status label and show you what that looks like. So I got tool strip status label. All right. But obviously that is what will get printed to the user. That's not what we want printed to the user. So what I did was modify the properties, one by changing the name. So I changed the name to something I could identify. I changed it to TSI login text. That's what I called it. But I also removed the text because I don't want that text to be showing. And then clearly whatever text is going to be displayed is going to be contextual, right? So after renaming it, and I'm going to delete this one that I just created because I don't need the two. All right, so I guess it's going to be difficult for me to remove it because it got condensed, but that's fine. In the window load function though, I did say that I want the username to be whatever we got back in our user object dot username, right? So remember we have our user objects that we're setting here and initializing inside of our constructor. Once the person logs in, we're passing over that entire object so we have access to everything about this user. And then what I'm choosing to display in that text is, and I call it TSI login text. All right, so I call it TSI tool strip item. That's just me. That's my prefix that I'm using. But I'm saying TSI login text dot text is going to be equal to, and then I said logged in as : and then I'm passing in that username that I got from my user object, right? So when the main window loads, it will know who is logged in. And it was really that simple. All right, so moving on, what we want to do is activate our add login button, right? So we have the manage user screen. We already have our database context object. We already did our password reset and deactivate user function. So now we need some functionality inside of add user. So in order to add user, I need another form, which I did not create. So we'll do that together. And then I'm going to right click my solution, go to add, click form. And then I'm going to add the form and I'm going to call it add user. So I'm not allowing you to edit the user. It's just add user. So I literally just want add user as a form. Click add. And then we make our usual cosmetic changes where we change the text in the address bar to add user. And then I'm just going to widen it a bit. I'm also going to copy some stuff from one of our existing add edit screens. So I have add edit vehicles. And the reason I'm copying this is, all right, so I'm going to use add rental record. And then the reason I'm using add rental record is I just noticed that add edit vehicle did not have that, that label at the top. We also didn't do the cosmetic changes. So I may have, overlooked that part with the add edit vehicle. But we can make those adjustments later. So I really just want the label. So I'm taking this label and I'm moving it over to add user, putting it at the top, changing the text in there. So that's add user. All right. And then we can, of course, recenter it. All right. Then I'm going to use my layout. So I have been using the table layout for these forms. So I'm going to use the container and it's going to be the table layout panel. All right. And then what does a user have? For a user, we would probably want to set only the username, right? So you don't want to allow your users or your admin user to be setting the password. Remember, we already hard coded a generic password. So we'll leave that generic password that when they click submit, that's all that gets created. So I'm actually just going to resize this since it's not going to be that big of a window. So add user, move our table panel or table container a little bit. We bring over our labels. So under common controls, I bring over my label, and then this label, the property, I'm going to set the text to be username. All right. And then I'm going to bring over a text box. So then the text box for the username, sorry, sometimes I forget where the things are. Text box, so we can add the username. And then the next thing that we'd be setting for this user is the role. Now, to remember that the roles are all stored in a table called roles, which means that I would probably need a drop-down list. So let me just copy and paste this username label. And then I'm going to change this one to say role. But then for the role, I'll be taking this from a predetermined list in a combo box. So let me just drag over this combo box. And then we did a combo box before. So what I'm going to do is just make this table layout a bit bigger so that we can maximize on the space a bit more. We can expand our controls a bit more. And then for the combo box, we have to modify the properties where we want it to actually be a drop-down list. So I don't want anybody to be able to type in there. Also, the functions or the items, would not be hard-coded. So we'll have to set that from the code behind when this form loads. All right, so we need a load function. So all I did was double-click the form, and we got the load function. All right, so in order to load in the items, we did something like this already when we were adding the car rental record. So if you want, we can go back to the add edit rental record, and then we can look at the load function that we did for this one, where we said we want to query the table for all of the cars in the table, and then we want to populate our combo box. So we need to do something very similar where, let me just get back to my design. I'm going to say that first, my text box for the username is going to be TB username. So let me go to properties and change that TB username. And then the combo box is going to be CB roles. All right. CB roles or role list or something like that. But once you have the prefix and the appropriate title afterwards, all right? So then what we want to do is populate this combo box list with the roles and the appropriate value and data member. So I need to initialize my database object. All right, so we have our database object. The next thing that I want to do is to actually put the function call or the query in here. So I'm going to say var roles is equal to database object dot table, which is roles dot, and then, well, I just want to list. All right, so I just want the entire list of roles found in the database, which we know is really the ID, the admin, the ID, the name, and the short name. Those are the columns, right? So then I'm going to say CB roles, right, dot data source is equal to our variable roles that we just declared, and then CB roles dot value member is equal to, and then we'll say that it is ID, and then we'll say CB roles dot display member is equal to, and then we're displaying the name, not the short name, but the name this time. All right, so we'll set the data source, we set the value member, and we set the display member. And after all of that, we want this add user window to be launched on the click of the add user button. So let me just go back to my manage user. So this is the button click event. So of course, we know we need to declare an object add user is equal to new, and I'm going to say add user as my initialization. Then I'm going to say add user. So the objects MDI parent is equal to, and then it's going to be this dot MDI parent. So remember that we just want to declare the MDI parent to be that. And then I'm going to say add user dot show. But then remember, of course, we want to make sure that only one instance of this shows. So we need to put all of this inside of that if statement. So I need to check if, and I'm just going to say utils dot form is open. And then I pass in the name of the form that I want to check if it's open, which is add user. So if not, meaning if the form is not open, then I want to do all of that. So when you click add user, only one instance should ever appear because of this if statement. Now we're not finished with this. The next thing that we want to make sure we have is the button. So we have a submit button, and I'm also going to put a cancel button, right? So you could submit that, okay, yes, this is the user you want to create, and you could also cancel the operation, right? So let me just do those two buttons. So button one, I'm going to go to properties, and I'm going to call it, well, I'm going to say submit firstly, and then it's going to have the name btn submit. And then for button 2, I'm going to make similar changes where button 2, the name is going to be btn cancel, and the text is going to say cancel. All right. And then for the cancel button, all I'm going to say is close. So if it gets clicked, I just created a click event, and I'm saying if you click cancel, just close the window. That's easy enough, right? And then if you click submit, then we want to do something else. So when you click submit is when we actually want to add the user that you're entering to the database, right? So then I need to declare a new object of type user. So I'm going to say var user is equal to new user, right? And then I need to collect data from the form. So let me do that first, actually. So I'm going to say var username is equal to, and then I know tb username dot text. So that is the username that was just entered, right? And then I'm going to say var role ID is equal to the selected value of this combo box. So cb roles dot selected, and that's index, that's item, but what I want is selected value, right? But then of course this is going to be of type object. I need it as an int, so I'm just going to implicitly typecast it to an integer. So now role ID is integer selected value. What else does the user object have? So we have the username, we have the role. What we don't have are the password and the active status. Now if I just created the user, I'm going to assume that the activity is true, right? I don't know why I would create an inactive user. So I'm going to leave that as true by default. If they want to change it later on, they can go ahead and do that from the management screen. But I have the role ID and I have the username, and then the next thing would be the password. So if you recall, we have a default password that we use when we did the reset password functionality. And I can review that and show you in the manage user, we did a reset password button where we set that to the default password. Now, if I wanted to retain this as the default password, then that means that I have it hard coded here, and I'm about to hard code it in this next function, which is not good, because then if I need to change it, I might change it one place and not remember to change it at the other place. So it's easier if we have it one place, right? So I'm actually just going to create another function in the utils where I'm going to say default hash password. So I'm just going to take all of this, right? and I'm just going to copy and paste it, and I'm going to call the function default hashed password. So this is just me naming it. You can name it something else, but this one is not going to take any parameters because what I'm about to do is hash the default password and return that hash, right? So I'm going to replace the reference being made to the variable password. Remember, we had the parameter here. So the parameter is here and we have password. I'm replacing this because I just took out the parameter out of this one, and I'm replacing it with a hard-coded password at 123. So that means if we want to change that default password, we need only change it here. And every time we call this function, it will just hash that default password that we have set, right? So what I'm going to do, having created this function, is one, go back to manage user, and then I'm going to change this entire block of code now to just use my new function, and that is default hashed password, which takes no parameters. So all it's going to do is return a hashed version of whatever that static text that we set is. So there are many ways you can make it more dynamic. I'm just trying to keep it simple for the purpose of learning. So we have utils.default hashed password that will just hash whatever that text is that we, the programmers or the business, has determined is an acceptable default password. All right. And so I used it inside of manage user. So I'm going to use it again inside of add user. When I'm adding the user, I want the password to be utils.default hashed password. So they're getting a default password also. All right. Now I have the minimum requirements for a user. I have the username, I have the password, and I'm about to set the activity status. Role ID is not required in the user's table. So we soon get to that part, but I'm going to say user dot, and then actually I'm going to show you how you can do it with the initializer. So I'm just going to say var new user, and then I'm just going to open and close the braces. And then inside of these open and close braces, just a little indentation here, we're going to say the username that should be here is equal to username. All right. And then comma, the password that this user is going to have is equal to the password variable, comma. And then the final one is active is true. All right. So when we're about to submit a new user, we collect the username that was entered, collect the password, declare a new object of type user, and then we fill in the columns. I put a semicolon there by accident. So we have username is equal to username, password is equal to password, is active is true. We can go about adding. So I'm going to say db dot users. So I'm now going to say add this record to the users table. So user database, users table, add this user object. And then after all of that, we save changes. All right. Now let's see if this works. So I'm going to click start. I logged in as the admin user so that I have access to the manage users. I click manage users. Now we still haven't populated this grid and we soon get to that, but let's click add user and here we see our form coming up. So we put in the username and then we can select the role. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to put in another user. I'm going to say admin1 and this person, this new user is going to be in the administrator role. Then I'll click submit and I want to show you something. So before I click submit, I am going to put a breakpoint right at line 48. All right. So, or my line 48 or the last line of this function, because I want to check something with you. So we're going to click submit. And then it got this far with no errors. So my assumption is that it went through, it created the user, the password. And then if we look at the user object and just drill down, we will see that we actually have an ID associated with this user. So you can look at that hash. That's an entirely different hash from what we're used to. But what I want to point out is the fact that once we got this far and we added the record and we saved the changes, it automatically updated our user object to have the ID that it got after it was added to the database. All right. So the relevance of that is, remember that this user object is is plain. It's dumb. It only knows what we tell it. So we only told it to have a username. We only told it to have a password and to have an is active state of true. We didn't give it an ID. IDs are being auto-generated by the database. So the fact that it did the save changes and then it continued, the code can reflect that it was saved in the database and it now has an ID of 4. And that will come in handy. And I'm going to show you exactly why. So I'm just going to continue. All right. And then, well, we need to put in our try catch and our success message and to close the window after everything is done. So we have all of that to do, but I just want to focus on something first. Now, remember that we just added a user and we selected the role from the dropdown. However, based on how we have designed our roles, so if I just refresh this, rerun this query real quickly, then you will see. Sorry, I clicked the wrong button. So we'll see our new user being added here. All right. But in our user roles table, we don't have any reflection of any new user with any new roles. So of course, if we're adding a new user and we're selecting the role from the dropdown, then we need to insert the role accordingly, or the user role association in this table, where the new user that was added with the ID that we just saw, in this case was 4, has the role ID that is associated with what was selected from our drop-down list. So we need to make that modification to our code. So after we've saved the change to add the user, we can now say var user ID is equal to our user object dot the ID column, because now it has a value, right? Like we just saw. Now, after getting that user ID and we already have role ID, and let me just change this to common R, keeping it consistent. So we have role ID and we have user ID. Then I can go ahead and say underscore db.user roles, or well, sorry. Skipping ahead of myself there. So I'll say var user role is equal to a new object of user role, which is my table, right? So I'm creating an object of type user role and then just going to initialize it here. And then the columns that I have are role ID and user ID. All right. So role ID is going to be equal to the value that I got from my combo box. And then user ID is going to be equal to the value that I just got from my newly created user. And then after I do this, then we know the next thing would be to add the record to the database. So db object dot user roles dot add, and then I'm going to say user role, and then I'm going to say db dot save changes. All right, coming on nicely. And then once this is done, it will create the new user and then fetch the ID, then assign him to the role, or her, right? Assign that user to the role. So before I continue, I'm just going to put in the try catch. So just writing try, pressing tab twice, and then I put all of that operation inside of the try. And then I'm not going to throw. Instead, I'm going to say message box dot show, and then the message box dot show, I'm just going to say an error has occurred, right? Something generic. You can always get as specific as you want, but then we've been through this quite a few times. And then after a successful add operation, I do want to display a message box saying, saying new user added successfully. So I'll just say new user added successfully, and then I will close the window. All right. And then, well, that's pretty much it for the add user. So let's just try that one more time. So I'm going to click start, then we log in, go to manage users, then add new user. And then this time I'm going to say view Clark. That's this person's username, and I'm setting them to be view only. And then I click submit, and then it says new user added successfully. I click OK. And then, well, the breakpoint is still there, so I'll remove the breakpoint and then continue. And then we're back at our main window. We haven't done anything with the grid just yet. But then if I go to my database and I re-execute this query, then I'm going to see a third row, right, with user ID 5. So remember that before now the user ID was 4, so now 5, and the role ID is 3. And if I go over to users and re-execute this query, then I'm going to see my view clerk with user ID 5, and then the password, because they both have the same default password. So these two passwords are the same, these two passwords are the same, the hashes are the same, right? So it's not bad if the hashes are the same. The point is that, you know, if you look at it, you can't tell. If I didn't tell you which one was which, you wouldn't know which password or what the English word or equivalent of these passwords would be. So the next thing that I want to do now is to modify my manage users window so that when a user gets added or, you know, deactivated or something, that it should reflect here, that data is going to be reflected. So I'm actually going to do it. I want you to pause the video and attempt it yourself. And I'm going to pause right here, do it, and then I'll come back and explain it to you. But I would really encourage you to try it on your own. All right, so I'm just going to walk you through the adjustments I made, and I hope you pause the video, you attempted it, and if you're still not feeling comfortable enough and you were waiting on me, then that's fine. I'll walk you through what I did. So I created a similar function to what we've been doing up until now called populate grid, and in populate grid, I ran a query where I said, and you see I still have cars. That's because I actually copied and pasted the code from our previous work, right? So in this case, let me just change it quickly. And so it shouldn't say cars, it should say users. So I got the users, I selected into that new abstract object, getting the ID, the username, the rows. So remember I had to do q.userrows.first or default to get the first role, or, it's a list of rows based on the data construct, but in reality, it's one role, right? So I'm just saying, give me the list. I know it's only one in the list, but the way they process it, it's either a list or it's one. So since it's a list, give me the first one in the list and then tell me the role name, all right? And then the active status. Now, remember that these column, well, whatever the column name is what will be used as a column name for the grid. So I don't want username looking like that and, name, and what is name? Name doesn't mean anything to an end user. So I renamed the columns. So I said, whatever column has username as a name, set it to username. Name should be role name. Is active should be active. And then we set the ID visibility to false. All right. And then what I also did was I modified the constructor for the add user. So when we click add user, I'm passing in an object of this, and this being the manage users form, right? And then I didn't bother to do two constructors. So sometimes I did two, sometimes I did one, sometimes I did two and I haven't used, one of them. So this time I only did one because really and truly, I don't think I'll be calling the add user window without an object of manage users. So, you can mix and match. It's up to you to determine what you may or may not need to do. So I just modified the existing constructor to have the parameter of manage users, and I declared the private property of manage users, initialized it here, and so that allowed me now, after clicking submit, to call on the populate grid function in the manage users window. All right, so once we click submit and it does all of the changes it has to do to the database, we show the success message, and then we refresh the grid, and then we close this window. All right. And then I also call this populate grid for in manage users. So in manage users, remember we had two other buttons. We had a reset, password reset, and we had the deactivate. So deactivate more than the password reset would need to refresh, because if we're changing the active status, then that's visible data changing, because we have the is active column showing true or false. So we need to refresh each time that is done, and then I need to wire up this refresh button. Doesn't make sense we have it and it doesn't work. So let me just add the click event to the refresh button, and this refresh button is just going to say populate grid. All right, so let's just look at this application. All right, so we opened up, logged in, go to manage users. So that's what our grid will look like. So we have our test user. Notice I'm not showing the password, of course, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense to show the password. This user, remember, this was the first user we created and we didn't set a role. So that's going to be blank. So I can actually just choose this one for deactivation. So let me just click admin one and try this deactivate. So admin one's active status has changed. And then we see that it changes to false there. It refreshes the grid and it changes to false, right? So of course the grid doesn't look all that attractive with all this gray space. You can resize it. I'm not going to prioritize those things. I just want us to get the functional stuff under our hands, right? And so let me just create one more user, and then I'm just going to call this user Clark, and this person is going to be a data entry clerk. Submit, and then click OK. And then there we go. So the window closes and then the Clark is there. If I deactivate, then the active status is now false. All right. And then just the same way, if I click, so if I, well, let me refresh. And then if I try and click one of these, we're going to get those errors, but because we have the try catches, it won't crash the program, right? So those are the wonderful things that we have been able to accomplish with all of this. Now, let me just put in one final function, and that is to check if the default password is the password being used when the user logs in. So there are a number of ways that this can be accomplished, right? Pretty much at the root of it, what we're checking is if the password that the user used to get authenticated is equivalent to what we know is the default password. All right. So what I'm going to do is modify the main window load screen, right? So I'm going to have to create a new form, and that will be like our password reset form, which is really just two text boxes and a submit button. So I can just do that quickly, go to Solution Explorer, add a new form, and then this one is just going to be reset password. All right, click add. And then, we can do our regular cosmetic adjustments. So reset password. And what I'm going to let this one do really is it's going to be a very small window. And we're just going to have two labels and two text boxes. All right, so I just designed it off screen. You can pause and design yours also, but I have two labels, one to say enter new password, one to say confirm password, and then the two text boxes for either, which I renamed to TB password and TB confirm password, and then my button, which I called BTN reset. So when I double click this, this form is going to have to talk to the database. So I'm going to have to do my initialization as usual. All right. And then now that I have made a reference to my DB object, what I'm going to have to do is retrieve the user, change the password part, and then save the changes. So if I'm going to need access to the user that should be modified, then I'm going to have to take it in as a parameter. So I'm going to say user, and then I'll have my local. So that's private user, and then say underscore user. And then I'll initialize underscore user to have the value of the user being passed in as a parameter. All right. And then, all right, so we've done quite a bit of work on the reset password. I'm going to pause here, and then I'm going to turn my focus again to the main window. So I'm just going to close all of these tabs that I don't need right now. All right. And then on the main window, in the load function, what I'm going to do is say that if the value of the user's hashed password is the same as the default hash password, then the person needs to reset password. All right. So what I'm going to say here is So in the window load, I'm just going to make some space here and I'm going to say, so what I'm going to say now is if, and then say something like user. So I have my user object here, user dot password. So I would already know the hashed password based on what's in the database. And then I'm going to say if that password that's in the database is equivalent to utils dot, and then this would be default hashed password. See that? So I'm saying if the password in the database is equivalent to the hashed password that is the default hash password. Remember, this function is returning the hashed version of the default password. So anybody whose password was just reset or was just created is going to have whatever password this returned, and that is what is going to be stored in their record. So I'm saying if the user who is just logged in has the same password as the default hash password, then we need to launch a window for reset password. So I'm going to say var reset password is equal to a new instance of the reset password window. All right. And then this time I'm going to show dialog. I notice that this is saying reset password. So because I didn't create two constructors, so it's expecting us to pass in some user object. So that satisfies that. And then I'm going to say reset password. And then this time I'm going to show it as dialog. So remember that we looked at how we can launch one window at a time. Show dialog is an excellent way to make sure you can't just close it just like that, right? So we're saying reset password dot show dialog, right? And then what will happen is that the expectation is that the user will use that reset password dialog and actually change their password. If they don't, then that's a problem. But hey, so when the window loads, we do that check and then we display the reset password window. So now when they get that window, then the expectation is that we we're going to get the values that they entered. So let's just say var password is equal to, and then we have tb password dot text, right? And then the next one is going to be tb confirm password. So var confirm underscore password is equal to tb confirm password dot text. All right. And then firstly, I want to compare them. So I'm going to say if password is not equal to confirm password. So we know that that's a problem. If you use any modern website, you know that the password and the confirm password values must be the same. Then it's going to say message box dot show, and we're just going to warn the user that passwords do not match. Please try again. All right. And then otherwise, we're going to now say that our underscore user object dot password is equal to utils dot hash password. And then we're hashing whatever value they put in as the new password. And then once we're done with that, we can say underscore db dot save changes, because we have access to the actual object coming over from the database. So we're going to try that. This has worked for me in the past. I'm not going to say it definitely is going to work now, but I mean, we're going to test it out now. So let me start, and then I'm going to log in with one of those new users that would obviously have one of those new passwords. So I'm going to log in as the Clark. So Clark, and it would be capital PASSWORD @123. That is the password that we set. And then okay, it's telling us that those are invalid. It's telling us it's invalid because this user is set to inactive. All right. So at least something works. So the clerk and the password, but the user is inactive. So that didn't work. So let's try test user instead. So I'm going to do test user and I'm going to type it in lowercase because in the actual database we have it as mixed case. So let me see if it works. Okay, it does work. And then they're telling me that I have to enter a new password. All right. So I'm going to change this password to the same word test user. All right. So we need to fix that because I didn't set the password char on the password and confirm password. But let us try the reset password nonetheless. All right, so I tested it and it does not work. And I mean, that's what I was fearful of, to be honest, but it's not a surprise to me, and we can still weather that storm because we have a bit of work to do still. So what happens is that even though the user object is passed over, we're technically not connected to the database by the time we hit this point, right? So we can't just DB save changes because technically there were no changes made to the database. All right. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to exit debug mode, and then we'll just make some final touches. So first, I'm setting the password char for my text boxes. And so my password char here is going to be asterisk for both of them so that, we don't see the plain text when the person is typing in their password. So that's one. Secondly, what I'm going to have to do is still retrieve the actual user from the database, right? So I'm going to have to say var user, notice not underscore user this time, just user is equal to db dot, and I'll say users dot first or default, and then lambda expression where I say q arrow and then q dot, and I just want where the ID in the database matches the ID that is in my current user object, right? So where those two match, I want about that user. And then I will say that this user that I just retrieved to the database, so I'm still connected to the database here. I'm saying set that user that I just retrieved to have the new password and then save the changes, right? Of course, we want to, as is customary, wrap all of that inside of a try catch. So right, try, press tab twice, and then we're trying that operation. And once that operation is successful, we show a message box to say that the password was reset successfully. Of course, you don't want to just print out what the password was. So password was reset successfully. All right. And then after that, we can close the password reset window. And then if there's an exception, I don't want to throw, but I will show our message box saying that there was an error. Please try again. An error has occurred. Please try again. All right. And so we should have more success this time around. So let's try that again. So I'm going to log in with test user. And the password is capital P, password, WRD, @123, log in, and then it's going to process, and then it's going to tell me I need to reset my password. So then I'm going to retype test user as the password. Reset password, it was reset successfully. Okay, and then we move on. So I'm logged in as test user, as you can see down there. Test user is not an admin, so I don't have manage users. And then I can go ahead and proceed and do anything else that the test user is permitted to do. And so that's a nice way to, modify how we view and interact with users, how we check if they have the default password or not, and modify how their login experience will look. There are still some gaps, and I would like for you to fix those gaps and, let me know what those gaps are. So hopefully you can identify them, because I know what they are. It's just that if I was to teach every single one of them, then this video would never end. But I want you to identify those gaps and then let me know that you think these are gaps, and then let me know how you think we could go about fixing them. And then, we could work from there. But for now, that's how we can manage users and